At When We're Not Hustling, we believe that seeing sex workers as full people outside of our work is an essential step towards humanizing and destigmatizing the industry and those who work within it. Help us to bring you the stories of the people behind the fantasies. When We're Not Hustling is a 501c3 fiscally sponsored nonprofit project of the Social Good Fund. Thank you for considering a tax-deductible recurring contribution. All contributions will be received through our fiscal sponsor, the Social Good Fund. You can contribute at nothustling.com. Thank you so much.
Put away the lingerie. I want to know you. Tell me more. I don't care about the news. I'd rather hear about you and see the world from your point of view. The coffee's already made, so I probably should just pull up a chair and tell me more.
Welcome to When We're Not Hustling, a podcast where sex workers talk about everything but. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. When We're Not Hustling is a weekly podcast that explores the lives and identities of sex workers outside of our work personas, our personal philosophies, ambitions, families, relationships, passions, spirituality, and so much more. We talk about our lives beyond the job, asking, what does the flexibility of sex work allow us to do, and who does it allow us to be? On this show, we learn who sex workers are outside of the work we're known for. When We're Not Hustling is an exploration of the people behind the fantasies. When We're Not Hustling is powered by Black Venom Digital. Black Venom Digital is a collaboration between myself and industry veteran Mr. Black Venom. Black Venom Digital aims to provide adult professionals and entrepreneurs with professional-grade web design, graphic design, and branding services that will inspire growth and success. At Black Venom Digital, we empower companions, creators, and entertainers with professional web design and branding. If you're looking for a new website or any other branding services and you work in the adult industry, please find out more at blackvenomdigital.com. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of When We're Not Hustling. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. I am very excited to have my friend Kaytlin Bailey join us today for our episode. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about all of the happenings, and there are a lot of them. First of all, this coming Wednesday, October 16th, we are going to be having our first live event, and I cannot wait. It's going to be at Stay Gold Books in Regent Square, and we will be doing a joint event / live taping of this show with Working Girls Press, and Molly Simmons from Working Girls Press is going to be in Pittsburgh, and we have a panel of me and Adri Rose and her and Emily, the producer, is going to be hosting the event, and it is going to be great. SWAT Pittsburgh is going to be there. We are going to have goodie bags. You can buy the books. We're going to be doing readings. I cannot wait. I am so excited to have our first live event, and I hope as many Pittsburgh people can come as possible. So we will have tickets in the show notes. It's an RSVP. It doesn't cost anything unless you want a VIP ticket that will include the book and some other like giveaways. So please, if you're in Pittsburgh, come to that. Also, we have talked about this before, but we now have nonprofit status through the Social Good Fund. So if you want to throw us some money to help us host that event, that would be awesome. You can donate, and you can get you can write this off on your taxes to donate to our little event at nothustling.com. You'll see a donation page there. Let me think. What else do I have for you? I want to tell you that Kaytlin Bailey, who has done performances in Pittsburgh before, so maybe some of you have been there, but also in New York and all over the place. She is doing a New York City run of her show, Horror's Eye View, at Here Arts Center from October 10th to 27th. So if you're in New York, please get tickets to that between the 10th and the 27th. So for the whole rest of the month, basically, she will be doing her one woman stand up show. And you really do want to go. I've seen it a few times. I saw it once in New York and once in Pittsburgh. And I'm hoping to see this most recent iteration of it sometime soon if I can get my way back up to New York, or if we could get lucky enough to bring her down here. Other than that, I think we don't have many announcements right now. That's enough. Those are good announcements. I'm excited to have Kaytlin on. Kaytlin is going to be talking about not just Horror's Eye View, which is her one woman stand up show, but she's going to be talking about touring that and boxing in a bunch of the cities that she was working in. So that will be very fun. So I am the kind of person who loves to hear what people are interested in, and whatever they're interested in while I'm talking to them, I'm also interested in that and thinking like, I could totally get into that. So this whole interview, she's talking about what she gained from boxing. And I'm sitting and thinking, man, I should become a boxer. And then I remembered that that makes no sense at all for me. That I would probably break my nails and there'd be all kinds of reasons that I couldn't do that. But you have to listen to her talk about it, because she convinced me, if only for an hour, that boxing might be the coolest thing that ever was, and that we should all do some boxing. So, by means of a quick introduction, and we will ask her to do this as well, but Kaytlin Bailey is a sex worker rights advocate, comedian, and writer, and also the founder and executive director of Old Pros, a nonprofit media organization creating conditions to change the status of sex workers in society. She's the host of the Oldest Profession podcast. She's also the creator of the Horror's Eye View, a mad dash through 10,000 years of sex worker history. She's a globally recognized leader in the sex worker rights movement, and she's been quoted in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the New York Post, the Village Voice, the Nation, Reason, and on NBC. Kaytlin Bailey's views are backed by Amnesty International, the World Health Organization, the Human Rights Watch, and UNAIDS, who all agree that the decriminalization of sex work is the only policy that reduces violence. So I am very excited to have her on. Welcome, Kaytlin Bailey. Hi, Kaytlin. It's nice to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessie. I love getting to hang out with you always.
I know. The funny thing about the two of us is that we're both workaholics. So we're like, we can't actually talk to each other unless we're doing something. So let's do something.
Yeah. And every casual hang we've ever had, we walk out with a new project we're doing together, which I think is part of the problem.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we should do another collaboration like we did previously with the D17 things.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, those were great.
Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with you, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Kaytlin Bailey. I'm the host of the Oldest Profession podcast, the founder and executive director of Old Pros, and I am currently touring my one-woman show, Horror's Eye View, which is a comedic mad dash through 10,000 years of history from a sex worker's perspective.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen it a couple times. I saw it when it was brand new and you were kind of workshopping it. And then you brought it to Pittsburgh, which was very fun. And we brought a big crowd for Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Your show. It was great. Can you give like a very quick synopsis of what the show is?
Absolutely. So it is a blend of stand-up comedy. You know, that's my professional background. I was a touring stand-up comedian for 14 years now. And I blend that with a real history lecture where I basically do like Western Civ from a sex worker's perspective.
History
and
grad degree, right?
Say what?
You did a history undergrad.
I do. Yeah, I have a bachelor's in history.
Yeah. So it's a good blending of all your.
And I also do quite a bit of personal storytelling, specifically about my dad. You know, I'm an Army brat. I grew up, a soldier's daughter, and saw the impact that multiple combat tours and the military training had on my father. And he actually passed like during the writing of this show from cancer that was caused by exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam. And so that brought up a lot of feelings for me about like what it means to sell your body, right? Like, what is exploitation? What is violence? What are all of these narratives that we've attached to sex work, right? Prostitution has become a symbol of
Right.
so many things that are actually ubiquitous, and you see across labor sectors and much more obviously in many other places. But we really don't want to talk about that. We keep wanting to talk about sex stuff instead of like the actual violence.
Yeah, I thought that was something that was really interesting about your play is the way that you like juxtaposed his career in the military and your work that you did as a sex worker, and how you both kind of entered into it at the same time in life, as in like very young people.
Totally.
What that difference was. So, what was the process for you of like going through and like parsing out what the differences there were? I imagine that would have been fairly intense.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been it's been an intense process. You know, I've been working on this show for 5 years. I would not have been able to write this show if I hadn't, been hosting the Oldest Profession podcast for as long as I have, and sort of built up this like Rolodex and basic familiarity with sex worker stories across history. Um, and also, if I hadn't spent as many years as I did trying to make drunk strangers laugh in basements and bars and laundromats and restaurants
Yes.
across the country, like I think my skills as a stand-up comedian really helped uh, move this show from a grieved lecture
Yeah.
to entertainment product. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
or something that people want to listen to. Because
Yeah.
if you can make people laugh, you can open up people's minds, I think, in a different way.
I think that's really true. I am a big fan of stand-up comedy. I watch a lot of stand-up comedy, and I'm interested in stand-up comedy as like a genre. And I have always thought that like one of the amazing things about comedians is that they can take the things that are hard for us to look at and put them right in front of us. And
Yeah.
that's so remarkable to me, that like ability to do that.
Yeah, I feel like at its best, right, the craft of comedy is a mirror, right? We play the role for society that jesters have played for like kings and courts for huge chunks of human history. And I think it's an important and sacred role. Very similar, actually, to sex work in that way.
Just going to say that there's something like very resonant about that with
Mhm.
work, because sex workers also play this like outsider role to people in positions of like power and authority.
Intimate outsider.
Yeah.
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 And and it's a very like important role in those spaces that I think, like, I know as somebody who has been both a sex worker and like a teacher slash academic, that I have a lot more access to a lot more people as a sex worker than I
Yeah.
did. And that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's something, yeah, I think that is also true about comedians, right? Like, it was actually easier for me to move in political spaces as a comedian than as an overt lobbyist, right?
Yeah.
People want to talk to comedians. People want to hang out with comedians. People don't necessarily want to hang out with policymakers. Like, it's which having met a lot of, I get it,
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, like, talking about the relationship between like violence and the work that you're doing, I mean, I think it's very interesting that you've gone on tour with your show, and you told me while you went on tour with your show that you made it a goal to box in every city you toured in.
Yes.
So
Yes. And then I told you that, and I succeeded in boxing in New Zealand and Australia and across, in many, many parts of the country. And I did not succeed in getting myself to a boxing gym in Edinburgh, Scotland, or anywhere in Scandinavia. Part of it is that I was tired. And another part of it was the language barrier was like a smidge harder for me to overcome.
Yeah, so
Not in Scotland, but like in Sweden and Norway and Iceland and like those
that's
places.
so interesting though. So I want to hear all about, because we are friends in the outside world, but I actually haven't talked to you that much about your boxing.
I know.
No, you need to start at the beginning, because
Okay.
All
right. So yeah. So what happened was, I like had to step away from comedy in the immediate aftermath of Sesta Fosta and what was happening with sex worker rights and the like seemingly inability of my peers in comedy to see the connection between what I thought was like an existential threat to freedom of expression on the internet and the work that we do. Was just I was walking around in a state of like pent up rage, and my lovely
turns out sex workers were right. It had
we were right, but the Cassandras of history just love watching our cities burn. So I was carrying a lot of this righteous rage that did eventually, propel me right to start Old Prose and to write Horse Eye View. And there was a lot that was generative about it, but this was a very sort of like destructive period. And my lovely now husband, then boyfriend, was like, "Hey, this is a lot. I think that you might enjoy hitting things as hard as you can in a recreational way for a while." And he actually introduced me to Muay Thai. There was this like great Muay Thai gym in, I forget what part of Manhattan it was. It didn't survive the pandemic. It was King's, but it was a fighting gym. And I remember I showed up for my very first class, like already upset because of the energy that I was carrying around. My fitness background is that I am a theater kid. And so like it's just not a thing that I've done. And I absolutely threw up my first class.
What is Muay Thai?
Muay Thai it's a particularly like brutal form of kickboxing because it involves elbows and knees also.
Okay.
So yeah. Okay. And it's like any kind of fight training, it's a very, very intense workout, right? It's like a lot of jumping jacks, a lot of jumping rope, which we'll get into because it's a sort of like a side quest thing in boxing. But I studied Muay Thai. And then the pandemic happened and I did what a lot of people did during the pandemic, which is I sat on the couch and doom scrolled for like a year and a half. But when it was time to come back into the world and also to come back into my body, I looked for another gym and I found Church Street Boxing, which is like a New York institution. I love them. It's another fighting gym. One of my favorite coaches from King's was also teaching there. Carmen, who is like a champion and a local like celebrity in the Muay Thai world. She's fantastic. And so I came back into that, and that was the first time that I started taking sort of like American boxing classes. And almost a year after getting back into training, I tore my PCL, which is like your ACL, but different, while I was fighting. It's like the ACL goes one way and then the PCL goes like the other way. It's like a rarer whatever. Okay. Like it doesn't matter, but it's not healing back. That's not. So I live in the world now with a torn PCL, and my doctor very gently suggested that like big pivot kicks are probably not like the most sustainable form of exercise. So I fully transitioned a couple of years ago to just like regular straight boxing. And in order to do that particular sport well or better, I want to be very clear. I am a recreational boxer. I spar like once a week, sometimes when I'm in town, right? There's no like training for a fight thing, but it has become my hobby.
Yeah. We like hobbies.
We like hobbies, right? Yeah, we like this is not like a third career that I'm embarking on. I am 38.
I mean, we have a tendency, but we don't have to.
We don't have to. No, there was a brief moment in time before I tore my PCL where I was like, I would like to step into the ring on purpose once in my life. And then I tore my PCL and I was like, heard from the universe, not for me, not the best use of my precious time.
Yeah.
And refocused on horse eye view instead, which I think was the correct move. But yeah, I get to go to and meet people in this sort of like niche hobby most places that I travel, and like fighting gyms are really cool. Like I love the ethos of combat sports. I love it's like a very consent focused culture.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, like, I don't know much about like the ethos of combat sports. Like what is the like what is the feeling and what do you love about it?
Yeah, I mean, what I love about it is that it's like everything that I like about like soldiers, but without the PTSD and minus a lot of the massage. Like I don't want to make big broad statements. I'm confident that there are misogynistic fighters out there, but I, as a woman, have walked into a lot of gyms all over the world and been received as a serious person taking the sport seriously. And everyone that I've engaged with has done so at my level, right? I've never been knocked out maliciously. I've never had a guy or a woman, for that matter, like bully me with being better at the sport or having, like 10 or 50 pounds of muscle on me. It's every gym that I've been a part of or seen has had a camaraderie about it that is really about meeting people where they're at and recognizing that, like doing bag work and mitt work and light sparring is really different from fighting, is really different from like actual combat. One of the first sort of like realizations that I had several months into training when I was back at the Muay Thai gym is I saw my first like semi-professional or like organized fight, right? It was like a Friday night fights or something. Like people like paid ticket money, but nobody was like doing it for a living, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I was really, really struck by the boundaries, right? Like as soon as someone tapped out, the fight was over. Like as soon as there was a hint of something that made a ref, uncomfortable, they called the fight. And also people were giving it their all within the context of these boundaries. And I was thinking about, because like my dad at that point was
I was thinking, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
please go ahead.
So much like a sex work session.
Correct. Absolutely. It really reminded me of like what makes like BDSM great, or even like regular sex work sessions of like, we have the boundary of this time limit. And so we get to explore things that we maybe might otherwise not be able to, right? In a longer term.
We wouldn't throw as much of ourselves into if we didn't know that it was going to end in an hour or 2 hours or whatever.
Correct.
I often thought when clients are like, oh, I wish this like wasn't, we could have this all the time. I'm like, but it would be
different.
Yeah. It would be so different. Like the reason that it's this intense is because it has a start time and an end time. And so I can see how like the fight would be the same thing.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about like how my dad would do it, which like comparing combat to combat sport. Right. Yeah. Is that like, if my, and this is not to say my father was a fair fighter. He would never do this. Like, I'm sort of like making this like stretch analogy, but like as a soldier, right, as somebody facing like an actual life or death situation, you do not put your gloves on and meet somebody in the ring and fist bump them and then do your best to like execute athleticism for the next, 3 minutes. You knife them in the gut and then walk away as quickly as possible. You know what I mean? Like, and so it was just this juxtaposition, but it really gave me a safe space to channel a lot of aggression. It changed the relationship that I have with my body. It changed the way that I move through the world. There was this glorious period of time, like 2 or 3 years in, that maybe I'm past it or not, but I was like sizing people up on the street and coming away with I felt like I could defend myself. That's never been tested, but like I felt and moved through the world with the kind of energy of like, if I absolutely had to, I could defend myself, which is not.
As a sex worker, I feel like I can't take those glasses off, and I'm like walking through the world, and I'm like, I bet that dude likes blood.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
I'm like, position with him would be like this. So like everybody's grandpa, I imagine, like having sex with. I'm like, why are you doing this? Stop this.
Yes.
You do. It changes your, like, doing something as intense as like boxing or in-person sex work, I think does change your relationship to people. You're like, huh.
Yeah, because you see something that other people don't necessarily see, like the thin veil of like not civility, but like, we are animals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fighting gym, right? Unlike street fighting or like war.
Yeah.
Creates, I think, like safe, boundaried opportunities for us to explore those deeply natural and wholesome instincts that are very much a part of our wiring.
Right.
Yeah, like I love sparring. I'm very bad at it. Like I mostly get my head knocked back, but I love getting into a ring with somebody about my size and us trying to hurt each other doesn't even quite capture it, but like, throwing punches and trying to defend ourselves, it awakens something that feels really important to my spiritual wiring. I mean, like, and I'm like this, right? Like I'm a soldier's daughter. I love debate, right? I love roast battles. I love that kind of verbal combat. And it turns out I like the physical stuff too.
Yeah. So what was it like for you the first time you got hit?
Not as bad as I thought it would be because my gym is very responsible. So I was wearing a mouth guard and a headpiece, and the person that was hitting me was doing it so with like 16-ounce gloves and, those kinds of things. And also, that famous quote makes a lot of sense to me, right? Of like, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. Yeah. So it turns out that, I am still a bit of a freezer, which is something that I'm definitely working on. But I also learned about myself that I could get hit and take a step back and put my gloves up and keep going. And that's a cool thing to know about yourself.
When I was in 7th grade, I know this is going to sound like a very weird story, but I was in the school bus and I had 2 best friends, and a 2 best friend situation is actually really difficult to navigate as a preteen.
Yeah.
So, there was 3 of us, which sometimes there was always somebody who had their feelings hurt or who like felt out or whatever, but we kept this going for years. And we were in the school bus sitting, the 3 of us, and then one of them got mad at me. I don't remember why, but what I remember is that she smacked me across the face. And it was so shocking. Like, because I didn't like expect to be hit, that I just was like, froze, like totally froze, because I didn't even know how I was supposed to respond to that.
Yeah.
It didn't start a fight. I was just kind of like, wow, that just happened. And it was something I still remember, like the first being hit like that and being shocked by being hit.
Yeah. Yeah. It is shocking. It does like overwhelm your nervous system, right? Because my first experiences with violence were actually not on the playground. I was more of a read alone by myself person,
Mm.
um, but with domestic violence.
Mhm.
And so I remember being and feeling completely overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and my
Mhm.
animal instincts kicking in very quickly, n- knowing, even in retrospect, that like freezing and fawning
Mhm.
was the best way
Yeah.
to keep me alive in that situation. And I think that would probably still be true even with my fight training. Like I don't think that there's any like future or past where I am able to like more effectively physically defend myself against that kind of like overwhelming
Right.
rage and violence.
Mhm. Mhm.
And also having spent hours and hours and hours in fighting gyms has given me a different context for some of those feelings. And so it's like I think helped me move past
Do
some
you
of that stuff.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you that. Do you feel like that's even if you wouldn't take even if it would still be safer for you if you happen to,
Totally.
like, God forbid, ever get in that situation again to, like,
Mhm.
freeze or fawn, like, do you feel like having that training, even if you didn't use it, has been like has it helped you to heal trauma? Like,
It
has there been
does feel like it's helped me heal trauma, and it feels like it's created more space in my mind for
Mm,
me to make choices
mm,
within the context of physical panic,
mm,
right? Having spent a lot of time, right, up against the ropes with somebody bigger, better, faster than me, right? Just succeeding, right? In hitting me in the head and the
yeah.
kidneys and the stomach, you know, like and being able to inhale and exhale and decide what to do with my feet and decide
Mm.
what to do with my hands in those situations has, I don't know, it's like broken through a little bit of the panic. Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's like it's a way to train yourself to respond.
Right. Or to train yourself to stay calm enough to make choices
Mhm.
even when things hurt.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
I used to be a long distance runner. I was a marathoner. And then I stopped. I broke my ankle. All kinds of things happened and I like
Yeah.
stopped running. And but I loved long distance running. And part of the reason that I loved long distance running was that there was something about continuing even when it was painful. And even after, like I remember and doing that to the point that like you didn't even really know it was painful because you had this like I don't know, like a overriding drive. So
Yeah.
that like the whole time that and obviously it's an endorphin thing too as well, like, but all these things. But I remember I would get home from long runs and I would get in the shower. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, damn, I am beat up. Like I would look down and I would have
Yeah.
blood on me
Yeah.
from like my clothes chafing or blisters or whatever that I was noticing for the first time.
Yeah.
I stopped. And um, there was something about that for me. And this might like what it did for me is it showed me like my own strength, I felt like.
Yeah.
And there was a point in time that like I felt like I didn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
Like I had proven to myself that I could do hard things. And then I
Yeah.
with my life and did the hard things, and I'm so grateful for that time that I spent like intensely training, which was a good like 5 years in my early 30s that I just like ran all the time and
Mhm.
trained and worked out. And I was 3 minutes away from like qualifying for Boston in the last full marathon that I did. So I was like
Wow.
serious. I was taking it really
Mhm.
seriously. And then I was just like, you know what? I did it. I did the
Yep.
thing. And I'm not suggesting like that you're going to get to a point where you stop boxing. You might do this your whole life. But like, I feel like there was something so powerful about doing something physically that was really hard
Yeah.
that retrained my brain to be able to do other hard things that weren't that.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this practice has shown me parts of myself that are really important
Mm-hmm.
that I believe that I can stay connected to even when I'm not actively training. And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely have gone through, I mean, ebbs and flows,
Yeah.
right? Like I fully fell off during the pandemic and became like a professional couch potato. I again, this tour across like Scotland and Scandinavia was a period of time where I was doing a lot of walking by necessity. I brought my jump rope with me, which in retrospect seems adorable. Like I just didn't create space for movement. But now I'm back in the city, right? And I'm back in the fighting gym. I'm back to jumping rope. I'm back to lifting weights, and I'm back to thinking of myself um as somebody engaged in an athletic process. Like I don't know if I would go so far as to say like I'm an athlete, but again, it changes my relationship with my body. I'm drinking less. Um it's easier for me to think about how foods and substances and sleep make me feel in my body,
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm not actively training for like a fight, because I use my body in this way so regularly.
Mm-hmm.
It's, inspired me to take better care of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. When We're Not Hustling is brought to you by Assembly 4. Assembly 4 is a collective of sex workers and technologists working to bring the overall cost of sex work down through their advertising platform, Tryst.link. They also educate clients through the Good Client Guide and provide resources and articles written by and for sex workers. Assembly 4 caters to all genders and demographics and raises funds to fight for sex worker rights and against exploitation in the sex industry. Learn more at assembly4.com. ASSEMBLYFOUR.com. Thank you for listening to When We're Not Hustling. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Doing so will help other people find us. And if you're a sex worker who wants to come on the show and talk about your life outside of work, we would love to have you. Please send an email with more information to nothustlingpod@proton.me. Tell me about the jump rope, because you said you were going to
Okay.
get the jump rope.
Yeah, okay. So the jump rope. Here's a thing. Okay. So here's what happened with the jump rope. So, and I think this is true in any sort of like apprentice or mentor or like teacher situation, that part of learning a new skill
Mhm.
is falling in love with the skill and also sometimes your teacher, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
like I developed
Yeah.
a motivational crush
Mm-hmm.
on my favorite boxing instructor.
Uh-huh.
And he was the person that was like, I mean, if you want to take this seriously, you have to jump rope. And I was like, oh, I am a person that doesn't jump rope. And that was determined for me by fate in the second grade. And so what happened there was I'm an army brat. So we moved like every 2 years, and I'm an only child and like a weird person. And so I was just sort of like removed from and placed into a different context, like every like 18 or 24 months or whatever. And one of the hardest transitions was moving from a military base in Germany to going to school in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where my birthday's in September. And so the teachers and my parents like conspired behind my back because the people were not in the habit of consulting 8-year-olds on their future or whatever. They decided that I should repeat the second grade.
Okay.
So I was back in the second grade with this teacher who had just been promoted from like kindergarten teacher to second grade instructor.
Okay.
And like, just for a little bit of I know maybe none of this matters, but these are things that I share with my therapist. And so I'm sharing them with you. So
I
you get it. So my previous second grade instructor had been teaching sixth graders and then was teaching second graders and treated us like the masters of our own destiny and like serious people that would engage in a future of serious things. And this like kindergarten teacher from North Carolina treated us like we were morons and did a lot of like group punishment. You know what I mean? Like, and I was always I had a lot of resentment against this particular second grade teacher. And she decided, or maybe it was part of the curriculum, or maybe who knows, jump rope was like a thing that we were supposed to do. And I couldn't jump rope. I didn't jump rope. It wasn't like a part of, it wasn't how I was spending my time.
Mhm.
And so she was like, Kaytlyn, I think that you should learn to jump rope. And I was like, well, that seems like a you goal. And so we spent one excruciating 45-minute lunch period alone in a classroom where she was like, you're going to jump rope. And I ended that with like welts on, like, I didn't have I didn't have the coordination. It was all very shame based. There was a lot of like, you should be able to do this. I already sort of felt like a failure because I was like repeating the second grade, but like I hadn't like failed anything. I had all of these like resentments and feelings like I didn't belong or there was something wrong with me. And she was like, kids your own age should be able to jump rope. And then at the end of that session, she was like, you don't have to learn to jump rope. This isn't for you. And I carried that belief with me for almost 30 years, right? I was 8 years old then. I was like 37, right? When like my favorite boxing instructor was like, not only do I think that you should learn to jump rope, I believe that you can jump rope. And we had a really different experience. He took an hour after class one day, and we started with the rope like in my hand doing the thing. And I felt very silly, right? Because I'm in this gym of professional, but it is a fighting gym. I am surrounded by like real athletes that like really do this, that like do fancy stuff. You know, taking it one step at a time. And in 4 months, I was not only jumping rope, but doing the little toggle. I am not good at jump. Nobody would watch me jump rope and be like, that is a master jump roper right there. That is somebody who should be doing.
So really amazing for you.
But I can jump rope, and it healed a like 8-year-old part of me that was told that this was something that I was never going to be able to do.
Okay, so I have a different kind of jump rope story. Which didn't end as well. So I used to be able to jump rope and do all kinds of things. And when I was younger, and then fast forward, I had a couple of kids in my 20s. In my 30s, I became a marathon runner. And I used to work out at this gym in the morning when my kids were at school. And they were still like, I don't know, 5, 7, whatever, like around there, the older ones. And I got together with these other moms who were like, oh, we're all here at the same time. We should like start working out together. So we start working out together. It was really great. We were all in great shape. Everybody was in great shape at the time. And I don't know where these women are now, probably in better shape than me.
Whatever.
But anyways,
some of them might be dead. Like, we don't know. It's like, sorry.
A time ago. But then the one lady was like, so the point is like, we were in good shape. It's not like there was something wrong with us, but we were moms. And then one lady was like, you know what we should do that would like ramp up this workout, these interval workouts we're doing is we should all buy a jump rope. We should bring it here and we should do like 30 seconds of jump roping. We're like, awesome. So everybody goes to the store, gets a jump rope. The next time we come back together, it's like a Monday morning. We're like, okay, cool. We're going to do the jump rope. We all do it for less than 30 seconds. Everybody stops.
Nope.
Nobody's jump roping. Everybody's peeing. And we all look at each other and we're like, no jump ropes.
Yeah, no, this isn't. Yeah, we, everything is great except our pelvic floor, it turns out. We absolutely not. We are living all of our childhood nightmares, wetting ourselves on the playground in front of our peers. Like, let's not.
It's so funny because it was like this mass consensus. Like we're all looking at each other and we're like, yeah, fuck them.
I love that the first step was like, let's all buy a jump rope, right? Like, yeah, that's great. That's so great.
We're these like suburban moms. We're like, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to be awesome. We do it for like 20 seconds and we're like, no.
I checked in. I'm listening to my body. Not for me. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you could do like enough Kegels to keep everything in and I could be once again better at jump roping. you never know. Life is
Yeah,
weird.
like, yeah, all right. And maybe there's a future where I could do a pull-up, but why?
Right. Okay,
But
fair.
why? Yeah, if we focused really hard, we trained really hard, we could get mediocre at this thing. Like, yeah, I don't, yeah. No, the jump rope thing, I recognize it. I've never loved running.
Mhm.
I've dipped my toe in it occasionally. I ran a little bit when I thought I was training to fight, right? And I jump rope now because it makes the footwork in boxing a little bit easier. Like it all feels like a means to an end. But if I didn't have the adrenaline and endorphins and the other brain chemicals that make me light up from like hitting and getting hit,
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't do any of that. Like there's nothing intrinsic. Like I feel better
Mhm.
after boxing in a way that I don't after working out.
Mm.
Like it's um yeah, and I wouldn't be in the kind of shape that I am if I didn't enjoy the sport as much as I did.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah.
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 Have you read Margot Stein's Stein's is book? I can't say that. Margot Stein's is her name. Have you read the book Brutalities?
No.
Okay, so she's a former dominatrix sex worker who also married a boxer and
Ooh.
welder. So not the man, she was a welder. So she talks about the fact that she was in an abusive relationship when she was younger, like physically abusive, and where there was a lot of domestic violence. And she ended up going and becoming a welder. And she was also a dominatrix at one point, and she married a boxer and became a boxer. And her and her kids, she's been in different, like, I think there was like a article about her that I saw recently about how they're teaching their kids to box because they have little kids now.
Yeah, it's a great little kid sport.
But she like was taught, she in this book she wrote called Brutality, she like, I think you might like this because she deals with violence and kind of like overcoming our like fear of violence, but through all these different modalities, and is a former sex worker. And I often struggle with reading there was I'll say I often struggle with reading memoirs written by dominatrix because there is a tendency in those to distance themselves from and that there's a whorephobia that comes across.
Sure. We didn't do sex. I never subjected myself to the right. Yeah, I understand.
She is an exception to this rule where like he does not say that, like, you know, and she talks a lot about like kind of the value of like sex work and what that brought, but how all of these different things that she did that were like very physical in different ways, like how they were all related to each other. So I thought you might be interested in that.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, that's very, very cool. I like the sound of that because it's been really interesting to me to because I was always a very like vanilla sex work service provider, but in my recreational sex life I've always been drawn to brutality, right? Like I think that I am like pretty submissive. And so that really complicated my experience with domestic violence because it was something that I was so drawn to.
Yeah.
In addition to being a genuinely dangerous and genuinely life-threatening thing. And it sort of colored my relationship to my own sexual appetites because they've always felt very like dangerous to me, like being wired for that, you know, like moving through the world as like a relatively attractive, submissive, people-pleasing woman. It's not safe. Like it's and so I don't know, the fighting, it feels like it hits a lot of those buttons in this like really boundaried way.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Contained or boundaried. Yeah. In a way. Yeah. And I mean, she's a beautiful woman and like talks about about what she was getting out of the relationships that were also very problematic. how she learned to kind of funnel that in a way that was more productive.
Yeah.
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 It's also complicated though. And like, I appreciate that you like brought this up because I do feel like sometimes, our, I've experienced this too, where I feel like my own desires are somehow undercut or work against my ideals.
Yes. Yeah.
And that can be like very complicated. Like what I want is actually not what I want. And how do
Right.
like
Right.
people who do the thing that I want, the kind of people that I want, and how do you like
I don't want to want what I want. Yes.
Wanting.
Mm-hmm.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it is interesting because like as a sex worker, we help people explore their fantasies. And a huge part of that is like giving permission and creating safe spaces and reassuring people that like what they want is okay. And sometimes it can be really difficult for us to do that for ourselves, or to find places to explore that. And it's something I'm working on. It's on my vision board now, like making more space for pleasure.
I think that is hard. And that's something that I've struggled with too. Like how much do you, what is it that I want and how much do I want it? And the problem that I run up to against, and I'm sure this is easier once you're not doing it like an active sex worker, but is like, how much space do I want to make for my own desires when I'm making all this space for everybody else's? And
right. It's like cooking for yourself as a chef.
Yeah. It's hard.
It's hard.
So like you're like,
yeah.
Find.
I've done enough food stuff today, actually. I don't know if I want to chop another thing. Even for me. Yeah.
Meal. God damn it. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's also super interesting. So this one last question, and then I'll ask my normal wrap-up questions. So did you find, as you were boxing in all these different places, differences in boxing culture across the continents?
I have to say this. New York goes the hardest. Sorry, I have to. It's important.
Do they really?
I mean, probably not. I haven't been to all of the other places. But that's definitely, I mean, we have a hustler vibe. We have a like edgy vibe. And it's like, so, I train at a pretty serious fighting gym in Manhattan, and training at a chill gym in a small town in New Zealand is chiller. it's that's it, Yeah, and also people push themselves everywhere, and I'm sure there are fighting gyms in Scotland and Ireland that would kick my absolute ass. But and other places too. Like I'm sure it's great. But Australia, Adelaide was very intense. They had a very intense program. And what I found is that like a lot of the community gyms that I've walked into have relationships with the like community. Like they sort of double as not necessarily service providers, but like youth center, like counseling adjacent, safe spaces for people that are like having a hard time to go and have feelings about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also found that some of the language is the same and some of the language is different, and some of the language that I thought was different is actually the same, and I was just having a hard time hearing people through their accents. So that was a fun learning curve. Like, just, you want me to what?
in New Zealand when I was 20 years old, because I lived in New Zealand for a year. I remember the first week that I worked at the cafe, I couldn't understand what anyone was. And I was like, this is English. I have no idea what you're saying.
I have no idea. Yeah.
And then by the time I was like moving back to the States, I was like, I got it. I can serve you a muffin. We're good.
Yes. I also found that like different cultures have a really different relationship with money. Like New York, uh, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, like New York, Australia, other places. You walk in, or yeah, that's what it is. New York, Denver, anywhere in the U.S., Australia. You walk into a fighting gym, and they're like, "This is how much that costs, and you can pay us." And in New Zealand, paying people for anything, fighting, coffee, muffins, always felt like my idea. And it was just like, oh wow, you guys have a really different relationship to capitalism.
They're like, just
I was like, how would you like to be paid for this? And like, we'll deal with that later. And I was like, well, I'm traveling internationally. I have these cards, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, we'll figure it out. And like, sometimes we didn't. Like,
it's fine. It's
yeah,
on a small island in the South Pacific. We're fine.
everyone's fine. Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
we? Yeah. So there's a bunch of sheep here. We'll be fine.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I like to end every episode with 3 questions. So the first one is, what are you reading?
Great question. I just finished Candida Royale and the Sexual Revolution, History from Below, which is an incredible book by Jane Kamensky about Candida Royale, who is a figure that I think everyone in sex worker rights advocacy should know. She started Femme Productions in the 80s and 90s. She sort of like created or like really pushed the idea of like feminist porn and was a big counter voice during the porn wars, as a porn performer herself, as an erotic content creator, as somebody who's specifically framing her work like like made by and for women during a time when the mainstream feminist movement was conflating like pornography with violence against women. Thank God that's over. Anyway, Jane Kamensky was the like curator and a big person involved in acquiring and acquisitions for the Radcliffe Library Archive at Harvard University. And so she helped acquire Candida Royale's papers and then got mesmerized by her story and the depth of her archive and ended up writing this really incredible book about it.
Wow, neat.
Yeah. And so that's research for the podcast.
Yeah.
I am also reading Normal Women, a 900-year history of women in the UK, and learning a lot of really fascinating, validating stuff about the intersections between like sex worker history specifically and women's history generally. Like, I'll just give you a little a tidbit if I can nerd out with you, which I know that I can. So in the immediate aftermath of the Black Death, right? One of the things that happened is like 30-40%, in some places like 80% of people died, right? Just like overnight. And women stepped in to like bury bodies and care for people and do lots of really important stuff. But this is before, this sort of like predates gendered wage gaps. That's something that like happens later. And so wages for everyone rose a lot in the immediate aftermath of the Black Death because there were like fewer people. So if you're not paying people enough to like harvest your crops, like fuck you, there aren't enough of us. I will go down the road and somebody will pay me more. And so because of that, more women were choosing to live independently, right? Not getting married, not having children. And this caused a moral and financial panic amongst the elite because more of us were not having children. We weren't replacing the population fast enough. This kept wages down. Sound familiar? So this was during the era where like the Pope sort of declared all cats seen in the company of women should be considered a witch's familiar and burned alongside her. And one of the kings of England during this era decided that all single women, right, not associated with a specific nunnery, not above a certain age, had to register as prostitutes. as a way of trying to bully women into marrying and starting families. This is also when they started kicking women out of the guilds. They sort of like made this deal with men, right? Of like, you can kind of lord over, like they weaponized misogyny in order to push women, like into these underpaid caregiving roles. They introduced they capped women's wages, right? They did a lot of things to try to make it impossible for us to live financially independently. And whorephobia was like one of the many, many levers that they pulled during that era.
Forced to register as like a prostitute if that's not thing. And just
yeah.
It's imaginable to me, and I say this is outside of the context of sex work, but like that sounds crazy. Like, why would you do that? But when I was in grad school, we were student teachers, like that was part of our stipend, right? And so one year when I was there, the administration was like, you guys have to start keeping track of the hours that you're spending teaching as opposed to the hours that you're spending being a student, and turn those timesheets in every week. And we're like, what? Like, since when do you turn in timesheets? You know, you go and teach your class but okay. And so we started doing this, but like when you're a grad student and you're just learning to teach, you're spending like a lot of hours, like prepping,
right.
and all this stuff. And so we would turn our hours in, and then the secretary would harass us if they were over 20 hours and was like, no, that's not right. You can't work over 20 hours. And we're like, well, we did.
But we did though. Right. Yeah.
You mean we can't do this? And so they would give it back to us and say, no, you must turn this in, but it must be under 20 hours. And we'd be like, so you want us to lie?
Lie? Yeah.
Like, just turn it in, right? So we were getting strong-armed into turning these in as like, you won't get your stipends unless you're turning these in. Well, fast forward a year, they take away all grad students' health insurance because they say we're not employees, and we've been signing off for a year showing that we're only part-time employees.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that
like that. It's been, so it's 1,000-year history of stuff like that. But
when
women,
how can you make register for something they're not? And I'm like, oh, but I did that. I signed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was my job and I had no choice.
Yeah. Or you were made to feel like you had no choice, which is like the same thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what are you listening to?
You mean like podcasts
or music or whatever?
However, I have been on this, like, so I don't want to be too much of a parody of myself. But I have been getting into the like phases, my personal phases, right? Like luteal, ovulating, bleeding, the other one. And so I've been listening to a lot of like new moon and full moon playlists that have like a lot of Lana Del Rey in them, a lot of Florence and the Machine, a lot of dark feminine energy coming out. Yeah.
Okay. And what are you excited about?
What am I excited about? I wish I was more excited about Kamala Harris. I really do. But I know too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I personally, honestly, I continue to be excited about Whore's Eye View. Like I just did a world tour of fringe festivals, and I have my first 3-week run coming up here in New York in October at like a real theater. And I cannot wait to just keep going with this show. I love performing it. I love connecting to audiences afterwards. I love the way that it feels and the way that it makes people feel. And I get to keep doing it.
You should come back and do it in Pittsburgh again.
I would love to come back and do it in Pittsburgh.
It was really fun, and we should figure out how to get it.
Yeah. And now I have way more Pittsburgh specific examples to like sneak in. It's gonna be great.
Where can people find you?
So they can follow Old Pros at Old Pros Online across social media and also at oldprosonline.org. We send out a weekly newsletter that is a roundup of sex worker rights related news from around the world. Also, all of my upcoming shows and podcast episodes. And you can sign up for that at oldprosonline.org. And if you want to hear personal musings or watch videos and see photos of me boxing, you can follow me at Kaytlin Bailey on Instagram and Twitter. I also have a website, but there's nothing about boxing on there. But it's just KaytlinBailey.com.
Great. Thank you so much. It was really great having you on.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of When We're Not Hustling. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. You can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or visit my website at jessiesage.com. The show was produced by Emily Foster and the music is by Benjamin J. Beninati. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Not Hustling Pod. To support the show and get sneak peeks, please go to patreon.com/sapiotextual. For more information about our show and what we do here, please visit our website at nothustling.com. Signing off. Have a great week.